Sure. So I am Justin Ferreira. I am the senior FFA advisor here at VVS. This is now my third year here at VVS, but also being in New York State. A little bit about myself. I actually started as an FFA member from Connecticut, where we did not tap anywhere near the amount of trees that we tap here at VVS. So I did all my FFA through there, went to the University of Connecticut, and then moved up to the beautiful state of New York, and then began learning all about maple syrup and the maple operation here at VVS. So I guess I could talk a little bit about the program and where it was and where it's become. So we've been doing maple here just about since 1992. And the program has started from like a one house sugar house with the canner and everything located in one place. And when we get back down the road, we'll show where we've come from there. The students, we used to have 3 different locations here in the VVS Woods, but also in some other locations where they used to use our old buckets, and they would tap the trees and walk around and collect their sap with the buckets and load it all up into containers. And we've kind of gone from that to some new systems, which our students will be highlighting today. So it's really been a program that has really grown and flourished, especially with the maple industry over all of New York State.
So as an educator, it sounds like you're learning a lot yourself.
I am, very much so. I'd say every single year I'm learning more, and there's still a lot more to learn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction.
No problem.
That's a beautiful day. We see a bunch of trees and lines behind us. We're so excited to learn more about that from you and your students. Before we kick it over to your students, if anybody has any questions that you would like us to relay to our hosts, please put that in our Q&A box, and we will try to get through as many questions as possible. So Mr. Ferreira, where do we start?
So we'll be starting with Devin Conley here. He's going to show us a little bit about how our operation works here in the woods, and he'll show you a little bit about our vacuum system and how we tap.
So we are unable to hear Devin.
Go ahead and talk.
I'm Devin Conley. I'm a junior this year at VVS. This is a maple tree, and this is a tap in the maple tree. So these taps, put them in. So we use a vacuum pump and a combination of that and the gradual incline, or decline rather, towards the pump, usually like 3 to 5% slope. And then, so if I take this off, you can kind of hear it pulling the vacuum. So then when the tap comes in, it goes from this tap into this line, which is called the draw. Or it's called the line. Lines flow into the lines that lead all the way back to the pump. So the best way to get maple syrup, or the best like sap producer like weather, is we have like a cold night below freezing and then a warm day above 32 degrees. It's when the sap flows. It's usually the best.
So as we're looking at the woods behind you, is there any unique vocabulary that you might call a woods where maple syrup's produced?
Yeah, so we would call it a sugarbush.
And so sugarbush because you're taking sugar from the woods and the trees, or so how do we identify a maple tree?
So there are a few different ways you can identify a maple tree. The easiest way is probably they're pretty distinct. Pretty distinct.
So we're looking at a maple tree behind you. And then we're also looking at some leaves, and they have multiple lobes. So when do you all come out and start tapping trees? Do you tap in the summer, in the fall?
So usually it depends on the weather, but we try to do it mid to late February. Again, the weather's dependent on when it gets warm, because it starts to get warmer in February, the sap starts to flow better.
And so all these lines behind you, where do they go?
So they go to our big tank out in the woods, which is like a quarter mile that way. It all collects in there, and then we bring a tractor down with a pump and pump it out and move it over to the sap.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So if y'all can share with us where that sap might go, we would be excited to learn the next step in maple production.
All right.
So as we're following Mr. Fiera, we're looking to the right and we see a bunch of lines. So it looks like they've run lines throughout the sugar bush. And that's pulling sap, as they highlighted, it's pulling sap downhill as well as a vacuum. So we're thinking about gravity as well as vacuum. And we're thinking about all those things that we learned in the classroom. So Mr. Fiera, do we have you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. So once we've collected that sap, how much sap do y'all collect in a day?
So it all depends on the day. We've already taken one load out of our woods today, which is about 500 gallons. I predict that we'll probably have at least one more load today because it's such a nice day. So we'll probably pull out about 1,000 gallons out of our woods just today.
And how many gallons of sap does it take to make a gallon of syrup?
So on average, we've been running at about 1.5 to about 2% sugar content. And we'll talk about that a little bit more once we get into the sap house. But it usually takes us anywhere between about 40 to 50 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup.
So when we're thinking about the breakfast syrup we ate this morning, or the breakfast cereal we ate, and we pulled out that gallon of milk, you're saying that takes 40 of those gallons to make 1 of those gallons in syrup?
Just about, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. So how do you get that sap from all the way down from the sugar bush? We took a quick little ride on an ATV. How do you get that from down below up top?
Yeah, so we have our Ford 7710 here that's connected to one of our tankers. That's about a 650 gallon tanker. And we'll load it as much as we can, and student or advisor will jump on there and bring it back here. And then when we get inside the sugar house, we'll show you where we connect to haul off of, to take it all out of our tanker.
So your students get to drive awesome equipment like this as they participate in the maple industry?
Oh, yes. We have a forestry and maple class that all the students will, most of the students, I would say, would get an opportunity driving the tractor. They get to drive our Kubota RTVs and a lot of our other equipment, especially as our maple season goes on. We have a couple of different pieces of equipment that they'll actively use throughout the year, and especially during maple season.
That sounds incredible. And I'm noticing these bunkers behind you. Can you tell me, is this what is in these bunkers?
So actually, I'm going to have my student Mark talk a little bit about it, and he'll give you the full overview. Can you hear me?
Hi, Mark. I can hear you. How are you? What grade are you in?
I'm a sophomore at VVS High School. My name is Mark Hoffman.
Well, it's nice to meet you. Tell us about what we're seeing behind you.
So these are willow bays. These are willow trims we collect from our willow field just over there across the pine trees.
And what might you use? What might you use the willow for?
So our willow we use for our fuel to fuel our evaporator, and so it comes from these willow bays.
And so, what is willow?
It's a tree that we grow a field of them just over the pine trees over there, and we have every 3 years somebody comes and they help us. We chip it all down, and we bring it all the way over here, and we put it in these willow bays.
Now, are these like the great big weeping willows that we see next to like ponds and things?
No, they're definitely much smaller, but they grow very fast.
And when you cut them down, does that kill them?
No, they stay alive and they just kind of sit in here.
And you mentioned that you use this for your maple processing. How might this be different than, we think about throwing big logs into an evaporator or oil? How is this used?
So it's definitely much smaller and easier to get there, and it burns for longer.
So you use this in your evaporator?
Yeah.
Awesome. And is this a project? Do you work with any colleges or do any research?
Cornell and SUNY, ESF.
That's awesome. So in high school, you're getting to work with college professors and research students, and that's pretty amazing. Do you get to do any of the harvesting yourself?
Last year, I helped out a little bit just from putting it in here. We took it from I can't remember whether it was like a truck or a trailer, but pretty much what we did is we shoveled it out and put it in here.
Now, do you need to do anything extra for it to be ready for your evaporator? Do you have to dry it or anything like that?
Yeah, we leave it in here and it dries out for a while. So that's our first willow bay. That one dries, and then we bring it goes up. We take the little John Deere, and we take a load, we put it in our conveyor belt over here, and it goes up, out, just over here, into this is when it comes into the sap tunnel. And it goes from up this chute right here into our auger, which feeds into the evaporator.
So this is a renewable resource that you're using. Instead of cutting down big trees, this keeps growing back like your lawn?
Yep.
That's pretty awesome. That's a lot of engineering. So do you all have to do all the maintenance and things like that on all this equipment as part of the program?
Yeah, so if any of this stuff breaks down, obviously, like mostly it's either forestry and maple production or our agri-mechanics. They normally do most of the maintenance.
And so what do you think about being able to do maple syrup as a sophomore in high school?
It's definitely a lot of fun. It's quite an interesting process.
And do you think you're going to use any of this as you go on to college?
Yeah, definitely. Just
awesome.
Being able to be out in the woods all the time and just with the trees, the animals being to hang out with them.
Well, that's awesome. So we have our wood coming in, and it looks like you have a big piece of equipment behind us. Can you share with us what we're looking at?
So this is our evaporator. This is where pretty much the whole process goes down. So it comes in. Are we switching? I can.
All right, I'll tap back in, Mark. No worries. So before we get to the evaporator, I'll highlight where we pull off the tanker, and then we'll highlight the process that it all goes through. So we connect to our tanker. We have a little hose on the end of the tanker over there. We connect some tubing to it where we pull it all through a pump. We also take a sample of our sap. So every time we come in with a load, we'll take a sample of all the sap, and we'll find a nice level surface, ideally, to drop our hydrometer in, which is how we measure that sugar content that is in the sap that's coming in. So this sap we just tested before when our forestry class came out. So it should be about 1.6 percentage sugar, which is a great percentage to be coming in at. We always prefer it to be higher because then that helps our efficiency, right? Helps that ratio of one to 40 gallons of sap. But then when we come from here, it all connects the tubing, which is all the way up here. That all comes over to our sap transfer tank. So some people might find this a little familiar, especially if they're working on a dairy farm, but it used to be a bulk tank, a milk bulk tank. And we've kind of retrofitted it for our need. We put it right in the ground. They parked it here and they drove away. And it goes from that tank, and that allows us to store quite a large amount. And that's where it ends up connecting into our RO room, which is right through this window. We keep it nice and sealed, insulated, and heated in order to ensure that our RO is never going to freeze at any point in time, because And the RO stands for reverse osmosis. So it's a very interesting and very helpful process that our sap goes through, because what it does is forcing our sap that we're collecting in through this membrane. And I can show you what one of those membranes look like just through that window right there. You can see one of those membranes. But it forces it through that membrane at a very, very high pressure to help us concentrate our sap at a higher percentage. So this year we've been pulling in our sap at anywhere between 1.5 to 2% sugar. And after it goes through that reverse osmosis, before it jumps into our evaporator, we're actually getting to start at just about 22% sugar. So that is helping us move a lot more sap through a lot quicker, and actually helps us really quicken that boiling process, and even hopefully get a lighter grade of syrup, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
So why would I want to concentrate the syrup? I noticed that there was a lot of fuel outside. And so why would I want that concentrated if I have so much fuel I could burn?
So it's all about fuel efficiency, right? So especially, I mean, we have a nice, sustainable, renewable resource, but like Mark was saying, we only harvest that every 3 years. So we have to really make that last. So really getting to concentrate at a higher percentage sugar will help shorten that boiling time, which in turn will also use less fuel, or in our case, our willow chips, with every single boil that we do. So instead of moving through a bay or two a year, you know, we can move through a little bit less than a bay, and it helps us really with that efficiency in our operation. And people that have like an oil-based or a propane-based or natural gas, you know, where us, it doesn't necessarily cost us as much money because we harvest our own willow here. But for those that have a system that they have to pay for that propane bill, right, it really does make quite a difference when it comes to that bill you get every sap season.
So the RO is like me getting a cup of water with 1 packet of sugar, and after it goes through, it's like having 3 packets of sugar added into the sap. Is that correct? Exactly.
And we have this white tank that's up here. It's our permate tank. So we collect that water that's also being removed during that process, and we'll actually use that water to help clean and flush out our RO, some of our different systems. And it's purified water. I mean, it is, you know, almost the cleanest water that you could probably find, because it goes through this very fine filtering process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So where does it go once we've concentrated that sap? What's the next step?
So it all starts over in the right here of our evaporator. So we're showing you the inside, what it looks like. So that is almost syrup that's in there. So it all starts in the right. So you got to almost imagine, you got to picture in your head that there is a nice big fire underneath here. As our willow chips are kind of coming in, they're burning. It'll get anywhere between 400 to 500 degrees under here. And it's slowly boiling that sap that comes in right on this side. And as it's slowly moving down, we start to get, you know, from that nice clear water to this kind of darker, almost syrup-like coloration through the Maillard process. And as it's kind of coming through here, we finally get to our back pans. And in these back pans is what is closest to syrup. I mean, we're talking, you know, our goal is about 66% sugar. Right, this is probably at, you know, anywhere between 60, 62. So it is very close to syrup. And we actually have a nifty little piece of equipment here. It's our automatic draw off controller. And what it does is every day we'll come in when we're boiling and we set our green temperature to where the temperature should be at based off of the boiling point of water, but also the boiling point of syrup, our biometric pressure. So what's going on in our atmosphere that might be affecting our boiling point. And we fine tune it to the decimal place of where we need it to be at sugar, to be at our syrup content. And then once it hits that temperature inside our pan, it'll automatically draw off, and it'll then come down into our little collection bin that we have here. And then this is where we check and make sure we make sure our bricks is at where we want it. And we might have to level it off or tinker with it a little bit more. And then we mix in our filter press aid, which is our diametric earth. And this helps bind to some of our impurities that you could have within sugar. So during this whole process, sometimes you get this thing that's called sugar sand. So this diametric earth is actually what connects to that sugar sand. So when it's coming through this filter press, this pressurized chamber, it is actually grabbing that diametric earth, grabbing those impurities, grabbing that sand. And it really does this very, very fine process of taking all of that out before we send it over to our canners to bottle. So that's just about, and the diametric earth is just like it's just a white powder. It almost looks like flour. It's not flour, but it looks like flour. And it's a very helpful tool that we use during this maple process. And really making it, I mean, as pure, as quality as it could be. I mean, nobody wants to drink some maple syrup that has a little bit of sand in it. It probably wouldn't taste very good. So that's this whole process.
So you
and
mentioned,
I'll be past. Oh, yep, go ahead.
You mentioned bricks. I thought we were learning about syrup. What is there something that has to do with maple syrup and bricks?
Yeah, so bricks is like how we measure that sugar content. So we actually have a little gauge right in here that'll sit right inside of our collection bin here, along with a syrup hydrometer. And we try to line everything up because we want to get it to the right percentage bricks in order to be at syrup.
So is that measuring the density of syrup, or? Yes,
exactly. It's measuring our density of syrup to ensure that our water to syrup, our sugar ratio is perfectly correct.
So it's a scientific measurement, much like a Fahrenheit or Celsius, but we're measuring density.
Yes.
And I think, exactly. Is this something, bricks, is that something used throughout agriculture and food production?
It is. It's not just used here in maple operation. It is something that kind of is transferable to a lot of the different aspects of the food industry.
And it's used to measure sugar, though.
Yes, specific to sugar. Yep.
And then we noticed something in your filter. What are the little white pieces that are in between the metal pieces? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so these are little filter membranes. So they go in as like very clear white pieces of, it's almost like a paper-ish. And we have two in between each layer here, and that's what helps catch that diametric earth and those impurities in between those membranes.
So if I'm making syrup for the first time in my classroom or with my students, and we're seeing a piece of filter paper there, I might not have a big machine like that filter press behind you, but from what you're saying, it's important to filter syrup. So what are some things that I might be able to do maybe on a small scale in my classroom with my students?
Yeah, so I've seen done, like if it's being boiled on a stovetop, some people pass it through, like if they have some sort of screener or some sort of cloth, anything that has like a finer grade to it, might still have some openings. It's not as fine as something like this, but anything that passes it through some sort of filter, some sort of screen that helps catch those impurities or the sugar sand really is what's best.
Mrs. Bailey's class wants to know, what can you use the sugar sand for anything?
So we don't, and I personally actually don't know of a use for it, but I imagine that there probably is something that you could do with it.
And my understanding is that's just like the different minerals and deposits that are found within the tree. So I've tasted sugar sands before, and it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, it's not the most it's not the best taste in the world, but I mean there's a market for everything. I mean, I have our secretary over in the high school asks me all the time if we sell our sap, because there's actually people that are collecting that sap, purifying it, and then they bottle it almost like a bottle of water. So I mean there's a market for everything.
And then Miss Bailey's class also has another great question. They want to know what do you think your biggest tree is that you've tapped?
Oh man,
you're looking at the sap. Do you have any large trees out there?
Yeah, I mean, maple trees can get pretty old. We're talking hundreds of years old. So a lot of what we'll talk about with the kids is we talk about diameter, right? The diameter of the tree, and that will help decide how many taps we might put on it. So actually, the students will learn how to measure like their own body. So they'll kind of say, okay, like this is 9 inches or this is 10 inches, and this decides, okay, this is a tap or no tap. Versus sometimes, our forestry class are called the tree huggers because we'll hug a tree and we'll try to figure out, hey, if I can't touch my fingers on the other side, then that means my diameter or the circumference, and then in turn the diameter is of a point where we might be able to put 2 taps on a tree. We do have some trees out in the woods that we put 4 taps on, which means that diameter is more than anywhere between 30 to 40 inches. So we do have some pretty sizable trees. We try not to tap a tree too much, but we do have a few trees that we do have 3 to 4 taps on them.
And so I'm hearing a lot of things that I might have learned in first grade, third grade, middle school.
Oh yeah.
As a sophomore, are you saying that in the maple industry, all those things in the classroom that I'm learning applies? Yes.
I mean, it applies in ways that when you're out here in the woods tapping trees, you're out here in the sugar house working with the, our evaporator, you don't even realize you're doing it at this point because you're doing it so often. It's so ingrained. We teach the students strategies on how to do the calculations and figure things out a lot quicker. So, I mean, that stuff that they're learning at that young age, it applies and it keeps applying, especially in even a maple syrup industry here.
So for my second graders out there, you definitely want to pay attention to teacher, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Math, science, English, students. All of them.
So Miss Brooker's class wants to know, how much syrup have you made so far this year, and how much do you think you'll make in a season?
So that's a great question. We've pulled in sap-wise, pulled in about 48,000 gallons of sap, and in turn, we've made just about 800 gallons of syrup. And we actually have some barrels in the back over there. So we're getting to the point where actually our inventory is just about settled, and like bottles wise, right, and glass wise. So we get to that point in the season where we'll switch over to barreling because it's a nifty way for us to, we sell our product, but then we can also sell wholesale syrup. And we can it's another way that we can make a little bit of money and still kind of keep up operation if we don't need it in our own inventory here at VVS.
So I did some quick math with sap, and it sounds, if you filled up bathtubs with the sap that you've collected this year, you all would have filled up 960 bathtubs of sap for the students out there. So imagine having 960 bathtubs full of sap, and there's more to come, correct?
There is. I mean, the season is not over yet. We're starting to get some of the days where the nights are not as cold. So we'll kind of see where it goes from here. But I mean, our guess will go until the end of March and then maybe even into April. We're hoping that we'll be able to be done before April break. But I mean, it's the weather. It's all up to whatever Mother Nature decides.
So Mrs. Biviano's class wants to know, is every 10 inches worth 1 tap when we're thinking about tapping our trees? We're thinking about that diameter.
Yes, we don't want to tap a maple sapling that is too small around, because it's kind of its years where its growth and its production are very, very vital. So tapping a tree at that point, it might not even be wide enough to tap. So usually around that 10 inches is when we are like, okay, that can do 1 tap, right? Or that can handle that amount of taps depending on that diameter.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So where do we go? We have now made syrup. We've filtered the
syrup.
Where does it go next? We have a bunch of syrup in the sugar house.
Go ahead, Matt. You're all good.
My name is Memphis Human. After that process, there's a tube up here where all the maple syrup goes through. And it goes into our cans. This can is for bottles. And sometimes you also do glass. And the other container is for gallons and barrels.
So we're looking at a canner. Now, do you heat that up, Mark?
You do heat it up to 180 degrees.
So you heat up the syrup to 180 degrees, and it looks like that's completely full of syrup. So do you have just a couple different size bottles that you use, or do you have multiple size bottles?
Gallons, half gallons, quarts, pints, half pints, nips.
And which one's your most popular that y'all might sell?
Quarts.
So quarts being there's 4 quarts to a gallon, going back to my elementary math.
Yes, 4 quarts into it.
And so how do you know about how many of those you might go through a year? Just an estimate? Hundreds?
300.
Wow, that's quite a lot of syrup. So once I put it in the bottle, what do y'all do with it? Is there any special way that I need to seal it to keep it from spilling?
Use our sealer. And all we have to do is just place it in the top cut and press the button.
So you put that on top of the bottle, and then that seals the bottle, keeps things from getting into it.
And we put the caps and the silver pieces. What seals the bottle?
So Miss Viviano's class wants to know, how long does it take for you to make syrup in a day for you to sell? How quickly can I take that sap from the woods and get it to a place where it's ready to go on a pancake? Can you make syrup in a day, or? So what's your favorite part about being in the maple industry?
Learn how to make maple syrup.
Now, do you make any of the syrup at home? Do you have your own maple business? Well, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
I do not make any maple syrup.
I'm back. My bad.
I hear you. Thank you, Mark, for sharing. So I have a couple of questions. I'm just going to pepper you with them, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
So Miss Brooker's class wants to know what happens if you tap a tree that's too small.
So I mean, it's nothing necessarily horrible, but your sap production on that smaller tree might not necessarily be as much. And also when they're younger like that, even a wound to the depth that we go in our trees, I mean, it'll take some time for that tree to then heal. So it's not necessarily something that, it's the end of the world if it's too, you're not going to have as much production. I mean, on average across the season, you'll pull about 10 gallons of sap from it. So a tap on a smaller tree just might not necessarily produce as much.
Thank you. Miss Fredetti's class wants to know, why do people refrigerate syrup after opening, even though it's boiled?
No, that's a great question. So we have to, even though it comes off of our evaporator at temperature, at where we want it, right? We even still have to warm it back up to 180 degrees because that's what creates a nice sterile environment. And then immediately once that's filled in that bottle, we put that cap on and we seal it. And once you break that seal, there's always the chance that some sort of bacteria can get in. And if it's not in your refrigerator, which helps prevent that bacteria growth, and you leave it in your cabinet, there's a chance, warmer temperatures, bacteria like to thrive a lot more in those conditions. And bacteria love sugar. So it's definitely one of those perfect place, perfect time. So putting it in your refrigerator really helps extend the shelf life of that product once you have it open.
Awesome. Ms. Fredetti's class wants to know, when do you start collecting the sap?
So like Devin was saying, out in the woods, it all depends on the weather. This year, we actually started tapping early where we are in New York State. So we tapped actually the first week in February, the Monday of that first week in February. And then, yeah, sometimes it's after February break, you know, but it all depends on the weather. It always seems to be right around February break though. And some people even tap in the fall if they want to, because that's what you need, just cold nights and warm days. Usually that fall season is a little bit shorter depending on where you're at, but we just do it in the spring here because it's a lot easier to do it all at once and then shut everything down for the rest of the year.
So we're running out of time, but I have a couple last questions that I want to throw out there. We didn't quite hear the answer for how long does it take to turn the sap to syrup. You mentioned bacteria, so I would think you might want to do that pretty quick, correct?
Yes, yeah. So usually within that night that we collect all of our sap in, we don't want it to sit. So we'll collect enough to be able to boil. And then we boil that night, and we're usually bottling that night. So this syrup that's in our canner right now was actually just from the other day. So it hasn't been in here for more than 24 to 48 hours. And it'll be brought right back up to temperature, and it'll be immediately put right into a barrel and sealed.
And then I have two great questions.
So the sooner the better.
And we're going to combine these. How many trees do you tap in a year, and do you need to give your sugarbush a rest every other year, or can you just continue to tap them?
Okay, so we have about 900 taps in our woods specifically, which taps to trees isn't like a 1-to-1 ratio because it all depends on how many taps we have on those trees. So we tap around 700 trees in our woods, just about between 650 and 700. And then what we do, we have a very purposeful tapping technique. So actually I have a little bit of a tree right behind us here. So if I tapped in one specific location in 1 year, I'm going to make sure that I don't tap in that same place again, right? So I'm going to go just about 3 to 6 inches over to the left and right, 3 to 6 inches up or down. And that really ensures that we're not tapping in some wound tissue that might be underneath the tree's bark tissue. So you got to think of it, we might not necessarily be the last time a break.
So as we're wrapping up our time with you, for all those teachers out there who might want to do syrup production with their students, they don't know where to get started. We see behind you this beautiful, shiny, large equipment, which probably is quite costly.
Yes.
When I get started in my classroom, is there any way that I can do this with my students? Are there any simple methods that you might suggest that we could use?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways that you can get into the maple industry. I mean, nowadays, you can have a big pot, a stove, and some bags that you connect to a tap, or some 5-gallon buckets that you can connect the tap to. As long as you have a drill with a drill bit, some way to collect the sap, some way to bring it over somewhere, and somewhere to boil it, you can do it.
Well, awesome. We want to thank you so much for your time, Mr. Fiera, and sharing VVS. It's an FFA maple program, agriculture program. We definitely want to say thank you to your students. They were great representatives and did well with presenting your operation. So we want to thank you for the time you took with us, and we want to thank you for having us.
It was our pleasure. I'm glad that we can show off one of the cool aspects of the maple industry and a bit of the scale that you could take it to, but it's a very interesting and very cool process that allows us to do lots of things here at VVS.
And before we let you go, if I want to get some syrup from VVS maple program, is there any way I can do that?
Yeah, so actually, I'll do my plug. Two things here. We actually have our VVS FFA Maple Weekend coming up this weekend. It's a big event all across New York State. Maple producers put on this pancake breakfast and give tours of their sap house. So that's going to be happening here at VVS this weekend, March 25th and 26th, from 7:30 a.m. to about noon for the breakfast, and then our tours will go from 9 a.m. to about 1 p.m. And then otherwise, if you're looking to get syrup at any other part of the year, all you got to do is give VVS High School a phone call. Our secretary will take down what you're looking to order, and she can usually deal with most of the customers that way. And if you're looking to get something more, or if you need some syrup shipped to you, we ship all over the United States. I've shipped as far as California to Texas to Florida. So if you're looking for syrup, you just got to find my email on the VVS High School website. Or give the school a call and we'll get in touch.
Well, thank you so much. And we wish you a happy 2023 maple season and hope that it's a productive one. And y'all have a great day.
You too. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.